Hi, this is Catherine, and this is Taking Tea with Catherine, and I thought today I would read an essay. Now, it sounds a little bit dry, but it's not. It is a pretty short essay, and I'm going to read it and make my own opinions, commentaries, whatever, as I read it. It is called A Nice Cup of Tea by George Orwell from Saturday Essay Evening Standard, January 12th, 1946. So it's a bit of a past time. So some opinions might be a little bit outdated, but the general idea, I think, runs true for now. And I also thought this is Nonfiction November. Essays kind of count for nonfiction, right? And lest we forget, I am drinking Yorkshire Gold tea. I made it as close as possible to Mr. Orwell's or Mr. Blair's instructions. And I'm using this mug today. Pretty mug of my family's that I've had forever. I don't remember exactly when we got it, and I can't show you the bottom of it, but believe me when I tell you that the copyright, or whatever you call it, on the bottom is 1984. So I thought that was a little bit appropriate for reading a George Orwell essay. Maybe? Now, and I love Yorkshire Gold tea. It's one of my very favorite of the teas. And when we're talking about tea here in this essay, in this discussion, we're not talking about herbal teas. We're talking really about Camellia sinensis, but even more specifically, the very Britishy tea, the one that you get most often, even now. I mean, maybe I haven't been to the UK as much as some people have, but when I've been to many people's homes, or even out in a cafe somewhere, if I'm offered tea and not anything further than just tea, this is the kind of tea I'm probably going to get. And I know in households in Britain, and of course elsewhere, people drink other types of things. Earl Grey, green tea, blah, blah, blah. Just like in other parts of the world, people drink different kinds of tea. But this is really what people think of as the quintessential cup of tea in Britain. And in the United States, if you want something like that without getting one of the imported brands, like an Irish breakfast, Barry's or Yorkshire Gold or whatever, you probably would have to go for something called like English breakfast tea, Irish breakfast tea, Scottish breakfast tea, something Britishy breakfast. I don't know why. Someone just said goodbye outside. It sounded like AOL. But anyway, so don't think I'm knocking anybody else's tea customs by reading this and agreeing with anything. But anyway, let's get started. If you look up tea in the first cookery book that comes to hand, you will probably find that it is unmentioned, or at most you will find a few lines of sketchy instructions which give no ruling on several of the most important points. This is curious, not only because tea is one of the mainstays of civilization in this country, as well as in Era, Australia, and New Zealand, but because the best manner of making it is the subject of violent disputes. Now, I don't know how violent, but who knows? When I look through my own recipe for the first perfect cup of tea, I find no further than 11 outstanding points. On perhaps 2 of them, there would be pretty general agreement, but at least 4 others are acutely controversial. Here are my own 11 rules, every one of which I regard as golden. So, ready? First of all, one should use Indian or Ceylonese tea. China tea has virtues which are not to be despised nowadays. It is economical and one can drink it without milk, but there is not much stimulation in it. One does not feel wiser, braver, or more optimistic after drinking it. Anyone who uses that comforting phrase, a nice cup of tea, invariably means Indian tea. Now, I'm not sure about this because I have had some, like I say, the breakfast blends, whatever, that had Keeman, which I think pretty sure is Chinese, and a lot of the black tea blends also have tea from Africa, etc. So I don't know if things have changed since then, but it is true that a lot of the Indian teas, not really the Darjeeling maybe, but like the Assam type of teas, or I guess Ceylonese tea, they do have that thicker with milk kind of tea, which he's referring to. But it does sound a little dismissive. Secondly, tea should be made in small quantities, that is, in a teapot. Tea out of an urn is always tasteless, while army tea, made in a cauldron, tastes of grease and whitewash. The teapot should be made of china or earthenware, silver or Britannia-ware. Pots produce inferior tea, and enamel pots are worse. Though curiously enough, a pewter teapot, a rarity nowadays, is not so bad, which I probably would agree with because a really good cup of tea is something you put a little love into, and making a bale urn, I guess, of tea doesn't sound so inviting, but I don't think I've ever had an urn of tea. I could be wrong. And this is a very nice cup of tea, by the way. Thirdly, the pot should be warmed beforehand. This is better done by placing on the hob than by the usual method of swilling it out with hot water. I do think it should be warmed, but I use the hot water, so, come at me. Fourthly, the tea should be strong. For a pot holding a quart, if you're going to fill it nearly to the brim, 6 heaped teaspoons would be about right. In a time of rationing, this is not an ideal that can be realized on every day of the week, but I maintain that 1 strong cup of tea is better than 20 weak ones. All true tea lovers not only like their tea strong, but like it a little stronger with each year that passes, a fact which is recognized in the extra ration issued to old age pensioners, which I don't know because I don't know too many tea drinkers among my elderly acquaintance, I don't think. But I always thought this was an interesting paragraph. I think it's more interesting now because we're talking about kind of an exception to what is normal. So this year, everything I say is always like, yeah, well, this is how I do things normally, but this year is different. So rationing time was not exactly normal times, but they had to make do. And the stronger the tea, the better. Maybe not so strong that it's like, I can't handle things that are too strong myself, but I do make it as strong as possible without having like, complete woo. Fifthly, the tea should be put straight into the pot. No strainers, muslin bags, or other devices to imprison the tea. In some countries, teapots are fitted with little dangling baskets under the spout to catch the stray leaves, which are supposed to be harmful. Actually, one can swallow tea leaves in considerable quantities without ill effect, and if the tea is not loose in the pot, it never infuses properly. This is actually true, especially because, again, if you're making herbal tea, it could be different. If you're making flavored teas also, maybe it doesn't matter as much, but when you're making a proper cup of black tea, or even green tea, without the flavorings and stuff, really the expression is called the agony of the leaves. It's good to have the leaves have a chance to spread out in the pot and do a little dance. But of course nowadays a lot of us drink at least a good portion of our tea from tea bags, so you can't necessarily always have what you exactly want, especially like at work. I mean, we're gonna bring loose tea. I've tried it, it's too messy. Anyway, okay, and also, yeah, you can have stray tea leaves, but I mean, I don't mind a little bit, but it's like, to me, it's like bubble tea or boba, whatever you want to call it. I personally don't like anything else in my tea. I want it without any other textures, but anyway, okay, where are we? Oh yes, sixthly, one should take the teapot to the kettle and not the other way about. The water should be actually boiling at the moment of impact, which means that one should keep it from the flame while one pours. Some people add that one should only use water that has been freshly brought to the boil, but I have never noticed that this makes any difference. This is pretty true for black tea, but not obviously for green tea, but we're not talking about green tea, so I don't know about reboiling. I haven't really done it too much, Okay, I got distracted because my cat food was just delivered, and that was rather important. Anyway, so where were we? Yeah, so I'm not really sure about the boiling water, but I know there usually is a suggestion to have fresh filtered water, etc. Seventhly, after making the tea, one should stir it, or better, give the pot a good shake, afterwards allowing the leaves to settle, which I usually do, but I don't know if it makes a difference, but I mean, why not? I did it with this and it's good, so I can't stop talking about how good this tea is. Eighthly, one should drink out of a breakfast cup, that is, the cylindrical type of cup, not the flat, shallow type. The breakfast cup holds more, and with the other kind, one's tea is always half cold before one is well started on it. I don't really know what he means by a breakfast cup. I don't actually understand this, so if you guys do, please let me know. But I do find that, like when I say that people picture, who are not from the UK, when people picture the British drinking tea, they picture like the afternoon tea or the Queen drinking from a cup and saucer, and that's very nice, but and I enjoy that myself. But when you're having your workaday, everyday cup at work or at home with breakfast or whatever you're having, I usually favor a mug like this because, well, it does keep things warm pretty long. And anything that's too flat and shallow does tend to cool off quicker. So if you add milk, you don't want it, it already cools it off well enough. So I don't know. Ninthly, one should pour the cream off the milk before using it for tea. Milk that is too creamy always gives tea a sickly taste. I don't put cream in my tea. I put milk. I don't understand this very much. I think this was a time when milk came with cream on top. Maybe in other lands they still do, but not here. So we just get like 1%, 2% whole milk, skim milk. So I don't know. Tenthly, one should pour tea into the cup first. This is one of the most controversial points of all. Indeed, in every family in Britain, there are probably two schools of thought on the subject. The milk first school can bring forward some fairly strong arguments, but I maintain that my own argument is unanswerable. Unanswerable. This is that by putting the tea in first and then stirring as one pours, one can exactly regulate the amount of milk, whereas one is liable to put in too much milk if one does it the other way round. True. Very true. When I was younger and I would read books about tea and everything, I was under the impression that putting milk in first was the right thing to do. But that came from an old tradition that said that if you had like dainty china cups, you might shatter it by putting something really hot in there. And therefore, you must put the milk in first. But now, yes, you can sort of see if you've had it brewed to the right amount before you add milk. And some of you might say, why are you even adding milk to your tea? Because that's what I like. So, I do. I really like milk in my tea. Especially this kind of tea, this proper nice cup of tea. Not, there are certain kinds of even black teas like Darjeeling that I will not put milk in. But we're not talking about that, right? All right. Lastly, this is going to be interesting. Lastly, unless one is drinking it in the Russian style, tea should be drunk, in italics, without sugar. I know very well that I am in a minority here. But still, how can you call yourself a true tea lover if you destroy the flavor of your tea by putting sugar in it? It would be equally reasonable to put in pepper or salt. Tea is meant to be bitter, just as beer is meant to be bitter. I don't like beer. But that's not your problem. Okay, if you sweeten it, you are no longer tasting the tea. You are merely tasting the sugar. You could make a very similar drink by dissolving sugar in plain hot water. Some people would answer that they don't like tea in itself, that they only drink it in order to be warmed and stimulated, and they need sugar to take the taste away. To those misguided people, I would say, try drinking tea without sugar for, say, a fortnight, and it is very unlikely that you will ever want to ruin your tea by sweetening it again. Now, as again, a younger person, I didn't think of not sweetening my tea. At home, we always had sugar bowls. My dad had sweet and low, which was gross, but but yeah, I always had sugar in my tea when I had it with, especially the, black tea with milk and sugar. That was my thing. Or I would, if I wasn't feeling well, I would add honey to some tea, or, I still do that if I make a toddy. And that was the way things were done. And I remember reading when I started reading books about tea about how you should have things without sugar if possible. And I was just like, how do you do that? Because that's not what I was used to. But one day I was talking to my grandmother, who had been through the war, in the United States, but, during the time of rationing. And she was talking about when she dated my, grandfather, and they'd go out to eat somewhere. And usually after dinner, they would have like a cup of coffee or whatever. And during that time, they didn't have sugar because of rationing at the restaurant. So they were like, all right. So they drank their coffee. I think it was coffee. My grandmother also drank tea, but probably coffee. And she said, it was weird at first, but you get used to it. And she says, now I'm fine without adding anything to it. And you just learn to get used to certain things. And it wasn't like she felt like she was depriving herself. So after hearing that, I remember thinking, I should try this. So I used to put two sugars in, 2 teaspoons, and then I just brought it down to 1. Gradually, I brought it down to 0. And that's been for many years, and I haven't looked back, except for chai. Chai, I know, with, sweetener is kind of nice. But otherwise, I'm very much I enjoy the flavor. And I still, if I serve people tea at home, when I've ever had people over, I will put out honey and sugar, because I do think that it's inhospitable to force someone just because you feel a certain way. But I still cringe when I see people piling lots of sugar in, especially because someone like me, I already have so much sugar in my diet that adding more just seems a little bit not good. So I think he's right. I think, well, like he said, a fortnight, it's 2 weeks, so give it a shot. Try. Or first, lessen the amount of sweetener you put in your tea. And by the way, any fruit teas, I know this is not what we're talking about, but if you're using anything fruit infusions, you really don't need sweetener. Anyway, so yeah, it's not a bad idea. Okay, back to the essay. These are not the only controversial points that arise in connection with tea drinking, but they are sufficient to show how subtilized the whole business has become. There is also the mysterious social etiquette surrounding the teapot. Why is it considered vulgar to drink out of your saucer, for instance? And much might be written about the subsidiary uses of tea leaves, such as telling fortunes, predicting the arrival of visitors, feeding rabbits, healing burns, and sweeping the carpet. I've done none of these things. It is worth paying attention to such details as warming the pot and using water that is really boiling, so as to make quite sure of wringing out of one's ration the 20 good, strong cups that 2 ounces properly handled ought to represent. Now, just by the end of that essay, you could tell the audience that he was writing to. He was saying, this is a different time. I have, a lot of times when I order tea online or whatever, or elsewhere, I usually buy it in 2-ounce packages. And I don't know if I can get 20 cups of tea out of that. Possibly. But I can't imagine living under rationing where you could only have just so much of anything, really, but tea especially. But yeah, eggs, meat, whatever. It's so weird. But I think he was trying to be a little bit helpful to his readers. I don't think he was trying to be pedantic. I don't know. But this was a successful cup of tea, and I used his instructions for the most part. So there you go. So if you want to read this, I should have mentioned this at the beginning. It's a truck. If you want to read this essay, it is easily found online. It's called A Nice Cup of Tea, George Orwell. Or you can get this book, Facing Unpleasant Facts, Narrative Essays. And he has other books that are, I have it back of me somewhere, that are collections of essays. They're some of my favorite of his writings, although I haven't actually read 1984 yet. So let me know what you think. Strictly talking about when you're making this kind of tea, really. If you agree or not, what do you do, or what has been your experience? If you've read this before, and what was your reaction, etc. So that is all for now. And this is Catherine at Taking Tea with Catherine. Have a lovely tea. Have a lovely nice cup of tea. An essay-filled day.